She was a brigantine, two masts, square-rigged forward, 282 tons. Her name had been changed 12 years before because her original name was considered unlucky. The brigantine they had renamed her was now sailing herself. The Dei Gratia, out of New York, watched her for nearly 2 hours before they were certain. The wind was running 25 knots out of the northwest. The brigantine's sails were inappropriately set, some furled, some flying, some torn. She was a ship being sailed by nobody. Just past 1 in the afternoon, December 4th, 1872, the Dei Gratia hailed her. There was no answer. There would never be an answer. The Dei Gratia put a boarding party into the water and pulled across. The brigantine's name was the Mary Celeste. This is the Cold Archive. Benjamin Spooner Briggs, New England merchant captain. 44 years old in 1872, from Marion, Massachusetts, where 4 generations of his family had sailed Atlantic trade routes. He had commanded 5 ships before this one. He was a religious man, a teetotaler, the kind of captain who refused to leave port on a Sunday. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Cobb Briggs, was traveling with him. Their 7-year-old son, Arthur, had been left in school in Marion. Their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda Briggs, was aboard. The Briggs family kept a small pump organ in the captain's cabin. Sarah played hymns in the evenings. Sophia sang along when she could. The Mary Celeste had been refit at Pier 50 on the East River the autumn before. She had been recoppered, recanvassed, her holds resealed. She was loaded with 1,701 wooden casks of denatured industrial alcohol, bound from New York to Genoa. The cargo was insured. The ship was insured. Briggs himself owned a 1/3 share of her. They cleared Sandy Hook on November 7th, 1872. 8 days behind them was another brigantine, the Dei Gratia, under Captain David Morehouse, also bound for Gibraltar. Briggs and Morehouse had dined together in New York the night before the Mary Celeste sailed. Later, that dinner would matter to attorneys.
My dear mother, the brig is a fine one, light, dry, fresh painted. Captain Briggs is in spirits. Sophia talks of nothing but the boat. We sail tomorrow at noon. Sarah.
The course Briggs marked on his chart had them clearing the Azores on the 25th or 26th of November. The last position he pricked was November 24th, about 100 miles east of Santa Maria in the Azores. The wind that day was a strong northwesterly. They were sailing fast. Then the log stopped. Briggs made no entry on November 25th. He made no entry on November 26th. He made no entry for the next 9 days. On December 4th, when the Dei Gratia put a boarding party aboard, the chart was still on the captain's table, with the brass dividers across the line. Whatever had happened on the Mary Celeste between November 25th and December 4th, it had happened with the captain's chart still on his desk. It had happened with the cabin doors open. It had happened with a meal half prepared in the galley. It had happened without anybody finishing what they were doing first. Oliver DeVoe was 35, the Dei Gratia's first mate. He climbed the rope ladder onto the Mary Celeste's deck just after 1:30 in the afternoon. 2 seamen came up behind him. The deck was wet. The hatch covers were open. The wheel turned freely in the wind.
The ship was wet in her between decks. There was no living creature aboard. The wheel was not lashed. The binnacle was not in its position. The main hatch was off. The forehatch was off.
In the captain's cabin, DeVoe found Briggs's chart still on the table. A sword in a leather scabbard lay beside it. Clean. A bottle of cough syrup, half full, sat on the medicine shelf. The captain's chronometer was missing. So were his sextant and the ship's papers. A man leaves with those things. A man who is fleeing for his life from his own ship leaves with those things. In Sarah Briggs's cabin, the pump organ was open. Sheet music was on the rack. A folded apron lay on the bed. Sophia's clothes were folded in a small drawer. None of them had been taken. None of them had been disturbed. What was missing was the yawl, the ship's only lifeboat, a clinker-built boat about 20 feet long, designed for 10 people in calm, coastal water. The yawl had been lashed across the main hatch with new manila lines. The lines had been cut. The boat had been lowered. Of the 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste, all of them had gone over the side into the yawl. A coil of rope was trailing from the stern, long enough to have been a tow line. Whatever had been at the other end of it was no longer there. The Dei Gratia towed the Mary Celeste into Gibraltar on December 13th. The British Vice Admiralty Court convened an inquiry under Attorney General Frederick Solly Flood. The hearings ran from December 18th to March 14th. 3 months. 28 witnesses. Solly Flood believed there had been foul play. He badgered DeVoe and Morehouse. He proved nothing.
The court is unable to determine the cause of abandonment of the Mary Celeste, but expresses its strong suspicion that the disappearance of those aboard was not the result of any natural cause.
The court awarded the Dei Gratia's crew an unusually small salvage payment. The unspoken reason was that the court did not entirely trust them. The unspoken reason was that nobody on a December afternoon in 1872 had a satisfactory explanation for why the Mary Celeste had been abandoned in good weather, fully provisioned with cargo intact. Every explanation for the abandonment of the Mary Celeste lives inside one of 3 theories, and each one breaks against a specific constraint. The first theory was Solly Flood's: pirates and mutiny. A boarding party kills the captain, the family, and the loyal crew. The constraint that breaks it: no bloodstains were found anywhere on the ship. The cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol was untouched. A boarding party that murdered 10 people and stole nothing, including nothing of value, is not what pirates do. In January 1884, Cornhill Magazine published an anonymous short story claiming to be the testimony of a survivor of a Mary Celeste mutiny. It was Arthur Conan Doyle. He was 24 years old. It was his first famous piece of writing. None of it was true. Readers believed it for years. It shaped the popular memory of the case for a century. The second theory is the academic one, articulated by maritime historian Charles E.D. Fay in 1942 and refined by Brian Macdonald in 2006. Industrial alcohol in wooden casks, late November temperature swings, pressure buildup, vapors, a small flash through an Briggs orders all hands into the yawl. He intends to tow it at a safe distance behind the brigantine while he waits for the vapors to clear. The constraint that breaks the theory: 9 of the 1,701 barrels had vented their contents. That is not enough to suggest the flash that drove 10 people overboard. It is enough to suggest concern. It is not enough to suggest panic. And then, whatever Briggs's reasoning had been, the tow rope parted. The brigantine sailed on. The yawl did not. A 20-foot clinker-built boat, 10 people, including a 2-year-old, 600 miles offshore in late November Atlantic swell, with the wind running 25 knots.
The vessel was found in perfect order with sails set. No theory of the abandonment can account for both the haste and the deliberation that the physical evidence requires.
The third theory is no theory at all. It is the acknowledgement that something about the physical evidence is contradictory. The yawl was lashed across the main hatch with new lines. It had to be deliberately cut down. That takes time. It is not a panic action. But Briggs took his family into a small boat in November, weather 600 miles from land. That is not a deliberate action. Whatever happened on November 25th, 1872, asked the captain to do 2 contradictory things at once. The lifeboat was never found. The captain's chronometer was never found. The sextant was never found. The Briggs family is not in any cemetery. The crew of the Mary Celeste is not in any cemetery. The Atlantic kept them. In Marion, Massachusetts, the captain's son Arthur, who had been left in school, lived until 1928. He was the only member of his immediate family who came home. The Mary Celeste herself stayed in service for another 12 years. She was deliberately wrecked off Haiti in 1885 in an insurance fraud. Her last captain went to prison. A coil of rope from the stern, the decision to launch the lifeboat, the cargo nobody touched, the chart still on the table, the yawl that never reached land. Wednesday's case. In October 1901, sponge divers off the Greek island of Antikythera surfaced from a dive shouting about corpses on the seafloor. The corpses were Greek marble statues, the cargo of a Roman merchant ship that had gone down around 70 years before the birth of Christ. They brought up amphorae, they brought up bronzes, they brought up one ugly corroded lump that sat in a museum basement for 50 years. In 1951, a physicist held it up to a window. Through the corrosion, he could see the teeth of a gear. The Antikythera Mechanism. Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. See you then.